All right. So today, I wanted to get an opportunity to hear what Scott and Gareth put together for Navigator back last week. Uh, the session itself, people were talking about it well afterwards. And here's the unfortunate part about creating events like this: I wind up not getting to see everything. And I know they put a lot of work into this explanation about what's going on in curation, what's going on in the programmatic ecosystem. And so with that, I'm really pleased to have Gareth, who is known as Gareth Who Hates AdTech. He also Gamera, so he has his own product as well. And then Scott Messer from Messer Media, uh, the uh, the AdTech Therapist. So I guess there's a little aspect of this that I am thrilled to be the person who gets to sit there and get this presentation for myself. I'll ask questions where it makes sense and whatever. But with that, Scott, Gareth, I'd love to turn things over to you and have you walk through your presentation here, walk through your thesis.
Yeah,
That's
thank
good.
you
Thank
for
you,
having
Rob.
us back to Navigator New York remote live. And for all who joined us. Rob, thank you for the introduction. Gareth, would you like to introduce yourself further?
Sure. I'm Gareth. I write the blog Gareth Hates AdTech. I also run a company called Gamera. I am unfortunate enough to have only ever worked in programmatic advertising for my entire career. Um, my most recent big company job prior to starting Gamera was I ran product at Rubicon and then Magnite for all things header bidding, and I was the chair of Preheader.js. So I'm a sell side guy.
I like it. I'm a Sellside guy as well, and in Messer Media, I provide a service called AdTech Therapy. And inside of that, I focus on all things sell side and helping to optimize your yield, your stack, your audience program, your display strategies, and whether that's digital out of home, retail media, or traditional web publishers, I'm there to help you. So thanks for joining us today. And I think we are going to dive into the curation spark in the programmatic forest, which I think actually, Gareth, was a little bit more of like a smoldering ember that spontaneously combusted rather than a real single spark. But I think as we get into the history of it, we'll uncover that a little bit more, right?
I think so.
Great. Today, what we're going to talk about, we're a little bit of like the ecosystem and the seeds of change and how we got to this place. And then what was that curation spark and how is this changing the ecosystem? And then what is the future of ad tech and programmatic? And I promise you, this is not the usual curation chat that you've heard before. We go a little bit further than that, but you're going to learn today, like, what is curation and how is it changing everything? Oh, and by the way, what about AI? Where does that come in? So let's dive in. The one of the fundamental things that we need to talk about that you're going to see today is the struggle of power inside of advertising and technology. And this is something that we label the media decisioning power dynamic. And it's really about who's curating the media. On the left side, it's the sell side. On the right side, it's the buy side. If it's the sell side, it's the publishers and the SSPs running direct campaigns. On the right side, it's algorithms and DSPs. And then we have the axis of relative importance. And in that, it's audiences and third party cookies. They're separate because you can have audiences without cookies, as we know. But publishers and SSPs are sort of important to both of them. If you're a media agency in the middle planning them, you're really concerned about audiences and you're less concerned about the cookie or the identifier, or how it's actually transacted. But DSPs are highly interested in third party cookies or identifiers, and they're less interested in the actual audience itself. This is why they're outcome focused. They triangulate signals to get there. And when you're further onto one side or the other of this, that's where we see the power dynamic and the struggle sort of begin to occur. It's easy to see that when you're on the DSP side of this algorithm, the publisher power and influence is very small. You're an open auction bought publisher, your inventory is a commodity. You have no one to call, you have no one to help you, and they are just buying your impressions because cookies and identifiers are present on your site. When you're a publisher and you're running direct campaigns, you have much more influence and power over how those things go. So going back to the top part of this, of the sell side, the curating media, that's the decision engine. And when it moves from the publisher side of a direct, where you get to decide where the media runs, all the way to the DSP side, that's what we want to watch. And so we think about the dynamic of media decisioning. But how did
Question
we
for
get
you.
here? Yeah.
Question for you, Scott, which is we often talk about us the programmatic space transacting on audience. And there's an aspect of that of going like, we talk about that term across this, but, and I agree with what you just laid out, the DSP is not necessarily looking for audience. Again, it's looking at things based on identifiers and performance on that. Is that something where we should like work to kind of clarify that particular piece? Because as publishers thinking about, I've got my audience and I'm trying to transact on that, it really comes down to, no, it's the audience to which is measurable or seen by the DSP is really what you're getting transacted on. There's something there. I look for your take on.
I think it's an important thing to call out. And like, I think if you've ever been a publisher trying to set up an audience deal or a PMP based on an audience, or you're trying to license your data to a DSP, you know how hard that is. They have their audiences, they have their things. I believe I took the trade desk training a long time ago, and they said, don't pick segments in the DSP. Just let our algorithm figure out what we should buy based on your KPI, and we will triangulate and reverse engineer the signals that we want to see that make this a high value user or a low value user according to the KPIs you've set.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, let's talk about how we got here. Gareth?
Yeah. So, I want to jump in the time machine for a second, because when we're talking about curation, we're talking about a series of companies that are performing a role in 2025 that is very, very different than the role that they performed in, say, 2015. So, when we're talking about the past, I'm referring primarily to the period where Right Media and AppNexus have come out. We have the concept of DSP and SSP, the birth of RTB. This is, however, pre-header bidding. And that's the key distinguishing feature here, is that we're talking about a period of time where a DSP's job is simple. It plugs into SSPs because there is nothing else to plug into. They are responsible for executing campaigns for media buyers. They target, they manage creatives, they do optimization, and they handle buyer billing. They do all of those things exclusively in the environment of, as a DSP, I plug into lots of SSPs / exchanges for you, Mr. Agency. SSPs, similarly, have a simple job. It is their job to integrate with publishers as effectively as they can. And in this time, in this pre-header bidding time, they do that with something called an ad tag. So the distinguishing feature here is that SSPs have to play a ground game where they are going out, they're talking to publishers, and they're saying, implement my tag inside of your ad server. And in this implementation, it's called a waterfall. SSPs are called sequentially. One SSP is called at a time. Therefore, DSPs, when they're buying from these SSPs, get very different views of impressions from each SSP. It's not like each advertising opportunity gets blasted to all the SSPs at once. Not at all. In fact, by its very nature, almost by definition, different numbers of impressions are going to come from different SSPs at different times, depending on the construction of the waterfall. But the key takeaway in this slide is that SSPs now have a simple job. They are the ones who are responsible, and there is nowhere else to be the conduit between DSPs and publishers in their ad servers. And they are responsible for traffic shaping, price floors, buyer auctions, everything in between. They have a well-defined job because there's no one else that can do what they do. No one can take the bids from the DSPs, clear them, and then handle billing, and then summarize everything that cleared in a report to the publisher for activity, say, yesterday. I also want to note that while this was a simple time, this was an unpleasant time. Like, managing ad tags in ad servers was not fun. Like, this was a manual process. You're pulling reports as a publisher every day, reconfiguring. Oh, these guys are. Oh, look, this SSP has a new hot deal with a new DSP. We gotta bump them up to the top and give them first. Like, what a mess it was. Um, so
It was a fun time, right? That was like the 3 martini lunch era of
oh
AdTech,
gosh.
right?
Oh, maybe fun for the martini people. So my RTK originally was a yield management company, my first company, or my second company. But what we did was we managed those waterfalls. That was our value add. We worked with ad exchanges, and every day for publishers, we would go in and move people up and down and wiggle them around and serve different waterfalls to different scenarios. And it was very manual, like high touch and very imprecise. So, and that imprecision brings us to the next slide, which is header bidding. Header bidding is wonderful in that connection, that waterfall connection that I just described, instead of a tag that was mindless, right? Because a tag in a waterfall is a pretty mindless thing. It can have a price floor and that's about it. It gets hit. If it wants the impression, it takes it. If it doesn't want it, it does something called a passback, and it passes the impression back to the publisher, or back to the publisher ad server to tell it where it needs to go next, or maybe directly to the next person in the chain. What header bidding said was, we're not going to do this anymore. This is an inefficient exercise. What we're going to do is we're going to ask all of the SSPs to, instead of just giving us an ad tag that has no pricing information and we call when our ad server determines to call it, we're going to ask the SSPs to send us bids. And the deep meaning and the deep kind of transformation that occurred here, which has led to everything. I think that's part of the thesis of this deck, is that what's led to everything is we now have two yield auctions. We have an SSP yield auction, and the results of the SSP yield auction are submitted to the header bidding yield auction. That is redundant. And everyone who was in the space when header bidding first came out, I remember this was 2015. We were all like, wait, so why don't DSPs just bid? But I got ahead of myself. But the key takeaway from this slide is you now have two categories in the value chain, SSPs and pre-bid, that are performing the same function. And that is an inherently unstable configuration of the universe. Next slide, please, Scott. So, that instability was widely discussed, to be fair. Everyone was like, well, in this header bidding world, what value are SSPs adding? Like, why are they there? We have two yield auctions. That doesn't make sense. And that was like, there was a lot of like hemming and hawing about this for years. And it just, the status quo just seemed to maintain. Like, it just like kept going, as it has kept going today. SSPs still play like a meaningful role in auctions today. But then OpenPath came along. And OpenPath, for those who aren't familiar with it, is the trade desk's direct to pre-bid integration. And what it does is, instead of submitting trade desk bids to an intermediate yield auction inside of an SSP, it submits those bids directly to pre-bid, which totally works because technologically, an auction is an auction. All pre-bid needs are bids, and they have been progressively. And when I was working on it, and now that Patrick's on it, it is building feature after feature after feature that existed in SSPs. And what I think that this did was this made the talk and the intuition real for SSPs. This was the transition to like, wait, the disintermediation that we've been discussing as being possible isn't just possible. It actually happened with one of the three biggest buyers in the industry, who still buys from SSPs, yes, but probably doesn't like it. And when they buy from SSPs, it's probably not because they think it works the best. So we can see here in our spheres, our layout, our Venn diagram now, there is no SSP in the OpenPath path. The floors, floors, auction hosting, pub billing, the things that are historically the responsibility of the SSP are executed by OpenPath inside of Prebid. And now we come to SSP Strike Back. And I wanted to shoehorn a Star Wars theme into this, but I just never like got my hands around the metaphor. Like there are definitely like there's a Darth Vader in here somewhere. I'm not sure who it is, but it's someone. Um, but basically, the inertia that we saw in the space where we were all talking about this disintermediation and how should be a thing, why is it not a thing, then OpenPath kicks into gear, gave SSPs enough time to think about, okay, how do we defend ourselves? Their circle in this Venn diagram has been encroached upon. It was initially encroached upon by Prebid. The moment there was overlap between Prebid and SSPs, there was encroachment. That's the creation of the redundancy. So SSPs kind of went, well, if Prebid can do that to us, we can do that to DSPs. And there have been failed attempts at SSPs to buy DSPs, to integrate DSPs in the past. Rubicon and Chango comes to mind. It was a miserable thing that happened. The thesis was good though, in defense of the corporate development teams. So SSPs were like, okay, we know we can't get buyers to shift DSPs because that's hard. Like it's anyone who's ever tried to sell a DSP to an agency knows migrating agencies to your DSP is really hard. There's a ton of interesting barriers that exist to getting an agency to move off of DB360 or the trade desk. However, SSPs realized, well, we don't have to do the whole thing. We can just take parts of the DSP and move them into our system. And if we do that, we create dependence on our SSP. And so that is exactly what they did. They went into a DSP and they were like, okay, which parts of this can we migrate to us? And what we've seen is that SSPs have done precisely this. They've clawed their way into the DSP Venn diagram for targeting, optimization, and data, where they were like, all of those things can live in us as easily, and some of them honestly should live in us. It's more efficient. And they successfully did it. What they realized, we can open up our side to a lot of these algorithms. We can make these things into modules that are actually more flexible in us because we have a reason, right? It's like whenever people talk about there being any kind of conflict, like one side fighting for something, fighting to defend their home, fighting to do something, they're hungrier. Their back is against the wall. They're willing to take a chance and to really make something innovative happen. Whereas when you're the incumbent and you have the whole market, you don't really want to upset the apple cart. So SSP is succeeding. And this is what we know as curation. Curation is the SSPs modularizing DSP functions and moving some of them into the SSP. And it is not anything more than SSPs finding a way to ensure that they add value in the value chain. And not only that, actually improve results as a part of doing this, which they pretty indisputably have. Curation adds value for buyers or they wouldn't use it. And this is the SSP Strike Back. This is a galactic, war that's going on basically above the heads of publishers and like on the outskirts of agency town where SSPs and DSPs are duking it out. But the reason Scott was talking about it being a smoldering ember earlier is Prebid really started the shift. And SSPs have always had the framework to do this. They had deal ID targeting. So targeting, you can see the number one thing in here, a deal ID system is a targeting system. It looks a lot like a DSP, or an ad server for that matter. And SSPs always had those. They had to build them for deals, but originally deals were like these weird and pseudo direct sales things. And this evolved into, oh wait, we can use this same thing for anything. Like just make it open.
You're
Next
saying
slide.
that they always had the force?
They always had the force, you know? And all these
You're
guys
a
used to be
prince.
ad networks. Before there was buy side and sell side, there were ad networks, and all ad networks did both things. So it's in the DNA. It's in there. They just had to, warm the muscles back up.
So that's a great moment to sort of pause right where Gareth was of setting the foundation and like let's look at what curation actually is and how's it operating in today's environment. Thank you to our very lovely card dealer here who's making deals in the forest. In case that wasn't obvious enough yet for all of us. I want to focus on two very specific phrases in here, which is sell side decisioning and sell side curation, because they are different things and they happen in different places by different companies or people or technologies. Sell side decisioning is a technological action that's facilitated by an SSP. This is when the bid request comes in, the deal ID is attached, the scoring is done, the fraud is removed, all that early sort of prep on the bid work gets done in the first 10 milliseconds of entering an SSP, or at least that's what Andrew Casale of Index has it timed at. And then there is sell side curation, which is the act of packaging media based on some list of criteria. So you take your list of criteria in order to package the media, but it's the sell side decisioning that actually does the packaging and attaches the deal ID to the bid request. And just on that list of criteria, it could be as simple as a list of URLs written on a napkin that get typed into the platform, or it could be as sophisticated as a Chalice algorithms or a Sybids or anything sort of in between there. And that is sell side curation. When we look at the players who are in this, there's three important groups, which is the curation house, the curation platform, and then signal aggregators and generators. The curation house is the company doing curation. They have a sales team and they're focused on campaigns. It's important to note that um, all of these are campaign sold curation deals. It is a deal. It's not just an open auction thing. And there has never been a single dollar of money spent in curation that only went through the open auction. All of it goes through a deal. The curation houses does not own the media and they have a data backbone. That's how you bring the data in and out with the other platform. Although theoretically, I guess the curation house doesn't really need a data backbone because you can rent data from all of the curation platforms. And those curation platforms, which is really just an SSP, because they are the one receiving the supply, bringing it in, and then they're using the data graph, the ID system, the segmentation, and the context to attach all of the data that's generated or by the signal generators and the signal aggregators. Those deal IDs are then sent out to buyers. There's a unique world where actually like an SSP can act as the curation platform and they can have a sales team that is out there acting as the curation house. And they can also facilitate third parties to be curators on their own platform. So there's some very complex scenarios where one company can perform multiple roles in this chain, but you have to be very, you can just use some nuance of like that is an SSP doing curation in their own platform. Things like that. Somebody brought up Amazon the other day. They are the curator, the buyer, the seller, the website, like they're all of those things, but they're individual teams and their individual functions. And then the last one is signal generators and signal aggregators. These are historically data vendors. A great example of a signal generator is Adelaide. They sit inside the supply layer and they are scoring media or predicting on media for attention metrics. They don't really aggregate the signal, they just make it available and they want people to use it, whether it's in the DSP and now it's in the SSP. And signal aggregators might be like an Experian or an Epsilon or a Lotame that are building much more complex signals and they're using identity and they're using third party data and they're stitching together a bunch of things. And then those aggregated signals can be used in curation as well. So the signal generators, the signal aggregators can also be curation houses, and they're gonna generate signal, and then they're gonna sell campaigns.
Where do publishers, I would think that publishers can play a role as, say, a signal generator, maybe even an aggregator. Typically, they are not the one with the platform, but they could be potentially those that are going out and selling it. But I don't think I don't know that I could name anyone that's actually a publisher that's a curation house. But
Anyone can be a curation house, and we're going to talk about that because it has a very specific impact on the industry. And that can be publishers. And if you'd like to explore that, please call me. And signal generators, we certainly are. Publishers, a lot of this data came from publishers. And it's a great way to think about how to get your data into these marketplaces. The reason why data vendors are a big space here is you got to think about how hard it was to be a data vendor and sell into the DSPs. First, you had to get an integration, and then you still had to go sell your data to get included in campaigns. And maybe you got put on a plan, maybe you didn't. The reporting was terrible. Like, it was a challenge. And so now to show up in the supply layer where you can actually package media with data, you're bringing a much more complete solution. And that's sort of what starts to shift the budget and moves the decisioning logic. When we look at how like the flow of curation goes, this was adapted from one of Lodomy's slides. Thank you. I thought it was really good. So I made one that was a little more advanced. You see that we go from the data vendor to the DSP. That's where the data goes. It goes down into the SSP, and then you buy across publishers 1, 2, 3. Pretty simple. When we look at the curation version of this, what you'll notice is that the data vendor has moved down into the SSP layer. And that SSP is working with the curation house that's creating a deal ID that goes back up to the top, and the DSP buys the deal ID through the SSP and gets to publisher 1, 2, 3. Easy, right? It is. It's actually quite elegant. When we want to look at like the curation workflow and what's actually happening, this is from the point of a curation house. You win the campaign and you get to start curating, start in the green boxes. The first thing you do is you might define your KPIs of how much you want to sell, what do you want to reach, and do those things. And then you start selecting the signals in the platform. Do you want context? Do you want media quality? Do you want first-party identifiers, third-party data? You get to attach all of that, and it selects your inventory. That's the media quality selection. And then you will set up in multiple SSPs often the same deal or the same replicated audience. You know, conference hosts who wear really cool jackets, and you'll put that in Index and Pubmatic and in OpenX, because they don't know which ones are going to perform the best. They don't know which ones the DSP is going to like the most. So you might as well put it in all of them. And that's where you see in those little trapezoid rhombus boxes, I think, or maybe a rhombus, I believe. Deal ID A, 1, 2, 3, 4, B, like those are all these things. And then those get sent to the DSP, and hopefully you're driving outcomes. But if you're not, you get into the optimization loop where the curation house might be getting, because you usually can get the SSP logs, and sometimes we'll get DSP logs if the client is participating. And then you go back through the audience and signals and inventory path, and you continue until you deliver outcomes. That's how curation works. Easy. So we used a lot of words, and Gareth talked about at the beginning of this. We should add, Gareth, next time we do this, the ad networks were the precedent of Curation 1.0. We believe that Curation 1.0 started somewhere around 2014. This is when SSPs first really were invented and came out of the ad networks. And we said, hey, can you guys make us more money? And they said, sure, we'll make some multi-pub deals and we'll go out and sell like the finance bucket and the business bucket and the shoe shopper or whatever's. Those things quickly spiraled into garbage, but it was the beginning of the SSP sales teams. And now there's hundreds of thousands of these deals that like litter the programmatic universe like space debris. There in the business model, there's a small correction here. There wasn't really much of a fee, but there was a tiny fee taken by the SSPs for that service. But you were happy just to see liquidity in your inventory. They weren't really using much data. It was very contextual driven, sometimes even at the domain level. And that was what we would call the traditional budget relationship. The DSPs were doing their thing, the SSPs were doing their things, the publishers were getting the money at the end of it. Curation 2.0 started in April of 2021. Why that date? The
Yeah, go
launch of Xandr Curate, which
right.
was sort of the first real platform that was um, facilitating curation in such an open manner and made it a product and a service. There were other platforms that were doing the packaging of media before this, but that's really like where Curation 2 starts. And it's the third party packaging of deal IDs. Yes, there are pre-auction fees that get taken out of these. You can use advanced algos and segments, and this begins to dislodge the budget. Now, why is the budget dislodged? Because anyone can be a curator and anyone can sell a campaign, which means that it's not just the media planning team who gets this or the DSP that decides where it goes. Somebody else who has no interest and no stake in the transaction showed up and now controls part of the budget. And
Would
that's
you
where we head
say
into.
would you
Yeah,
say, Scott, that very few people recognize that opportunity? Meaning this is where the Audigents of the world and some others kind of saw opportunity to kind of jump in this, and maybe a few publishers and whatever, but most people probably didn't note that date, like I didn't, to say that, like, wait a second, I could change the dynamics of this.
I think it took a while to understand what was happening, and I think some prescient few did understand this. But people have always been competing in the sales area. But what Curation 2.0 enables is really for anyone to come in and be a decision engine, because the established pipes of an SSP do sell side curation, and then you have these like rent a boxes where the data is there, the media is there, everything you need to create a deal ID is in these platforms. And then you have to convince somebody that you can drive an outcome for them. And that's kind of easy. It's kind of hard, but it's doable. And Curation 3.0, we're heading into like a whole new world of packaging and maybe even buying directly inside of an SSP. And we're going to talk a lot about 3.0 coming up soon. When we talk about this shift that's happening and we go back to the media decisioning power dynamic, this is the way we used to see the world. SSPs are dumb and DSPs are rich. Andrew Casale very famously said, "We are a commodity. We are the dumb pipes." I agree with him. They got that yelled at them for 10 years, 8 years. All of Curation won. They were dumb pipes. What are you going to do for me today? They were undifferentiated and they had no changes. The DSP, though, is the decision engine. It's the smart pipe. It owns the relationship and it drives the outcomes, which means it gets to be the margin extractor. That's where the money is. What are SSPs? They're dumb pipes. They're toll road collectors. They take a tiny bit of CPM off of every impression that gets sold. And what do publishers get? Scraps from Longshank's table. We are at the very bottom of the media decisioning power dynamic in this scenario. Curation is changing that. So the DSP connection is now intermediated by the curation house who's creating deal IDs. That curation house is the decision engine now. And they own the relationship and the outcome, and they get to extract the margin, which means that the DSP becomes the dumber pipe, and it's transactional for billing. If we go back to Gareth's history, one of the big functions of DSPs is pacing and billing. How much money should I spend today, and who do I invoice? That needs to happen. Somebody has to do that. And that's what the DSPs are doing. So we're actually seeing very lightweight DSPs emerge, like Hawk DSP, that are charging a minimal transaction fee. I think it's 5% is like their known rate. And all they do is really pacing and invoicing. You can't get all the fancy bells and whistles. There's no big planning teams. There's none of that, but it is used to buy curated deals because they don't need to do it because it all happened in the supply layer through the curation house. I will note that in curation, you can also publishers can license their data and get a fee for it, right? So you can be a signal generator and receive revenue from it. There's a better marketplace for data that comes through here. And SSPs become a smarter pipe. Now, when we talk about like DSPs want to respond to this threat, we move into OpenPath. This is the OpenPath or Clearline look at the world. And they start to verticalize what they are. Remember our economics lessons of horizontal businesses and vertically integrated businesses? This is the vertically integrated stack. The DSP takes its DSP bidder and puts it straight into the pre-bid layer. And then it does everything itself. It has to score the media, it has to figure out the data, it does all those things. And it goes back to being the smart pipe and the margin extractor, all facilitated through pre-bid. And again, the publisher is back to getting the scraps from the table. We're going to come back to this slide. Take a picture of it, though.
It's our conclusion slide.
Okay, Mr. Glaser, we have now set the table for curation. Our audience understands what's in here. Tell us how the world changes.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. So, per Scott's last two slides, we really see two new flavors of, I'm going to use the dirty word, ad networks emerging. And really, we have vertical stacks. So a vertical stack is where the entirety of the supply chain that results in a bid being submitted to pre-bid lives in one company, where there is a single company doing pre-bid integrations with publishers or with publisher aggregators, and they are executing their campaigns directly into pre-bid. OpenPath is the quintessential example of this. However, there are others, especially if you look at international markets. A lot of DSPs have pre-bid adapters and are going direct to pub, and it's actually very destabilizing. As I talk to lots of people who run sales houses, and they're like, yeah, it's getting weird because the DSPs are just going straight to pub, and now we have to deal with that somehow. The alternative to this, though, is the horizontal stack. The horizontal stack we have listed here is the exchange and the DSP and the point providers. But the concept here is that you take a smattering of companies where various features that need to happen in the course of executing a campaign are modularized and can be selected buffet style across those companies. So you can use a low feature DSP. Let's look at them here. So the horizontal stack on the left is what we'll talk about first. You can use a DSP with deal IDs and a curation layer, and the DSP could be low feature, but like Scott said, they're responsible for pacing, for campaign object management, for collecting checks. But then in the deal ID, you're like, okay, here is where I want the actual campaign optimization to sit, and here's where I want my data integrations to sit. The idea is those two things combined are now effectively something capable of submitting a bid. And which of those functions which company does is less important than the fact that you are selecting multiple companies, piecing them together, and they are resulting in a bid for an impression and a system that is capable of doing that, that is submitted to pre-bid. The vertical stack, that all happens in one place. And I think that this is the future that we're going to see. We're going to see a bunch of new companies pop up that operate in one of these roles. And anywhere you have multiple companies doing things in 2025, you have the opportunity for someone to slap the word agent on it, which people love to do. So in our horizontal stacks, right, where we've described as you pick different modules from different systems to deliver bids, naturally, there have emerged companies that say, we have agents who will do that picking for you, where you tell us what you want, And our agents are going to go interact with each of the different companies that we're integrated with. And we're going to pick data from here, an optimization algorithm from here. We're going to do this here. And it's going to execute as a single layer. And that is the middle. And so this, we think, is the future. This is scope 3, right? So this is scope 3's pitch. If you look at what scope 3 says that they do, they're an agentic orchestration layer and a signal provider, both. They do both of them. But the agentic orchestration layer, I think we're going to see more of them because this
Because
becomes a
right
place to
now,
compete.
Gareth, the scope 3, the way it's set up, only happens in the supply layer, and they still have to send out deal IDs right now. But why not move? Can we move the DSP into the SSP? Like, why does it have to go anywhere? Right?
Yeah,
Like, is it actually in the SSP, or is it like, where is the DSP? Does it even
yeah.
exist?
Well, I think right now they would say they're DSP agnostic, and
Yes.
they'll feed you this line. The more DSPs we work with, the better, because the more things our agents can choose to pick the best one for a given campaign. However, anywhere there are lots of systems with lots of agents doing things, it makes me think if you were to watch the optimal thing, right? I'm sure one will emerge. It would be pretty hard to fight the temptation to build a system that just does the optimal thing in one place. So I do
Right.
think that this orchestration layer could give birth to new vertical players. I think that's something that we could see happen. It's
Right.
definitely
It's
possible.
if you think of it as like the horizontal stack that exists today is going to compress itself all into a single company. And
Yep.
that, let's just use scope 3 as that one, right? It compresses itself into the one single company doing multiple functions, and it moves into the SSP layer. And then it still is that stack of functions, right? And so you could then replace them with modular pieces. So what you're going to see is the accordioning, if I can make that a verb, of stacks. And really, the horizontal stack and the curate, like, these are three identical things. It's just who owns which pieces and whether you're skipping certain things. Because the DSP in the vertical model, they can do curation for themselves in the supply layer. Like doing pre-bid curation, like they can package their deals down there. They can make the data available. They could build an SSP if they wanted. It's kind of the same thing. How do you think like the trade desk receives bids? Right? There's still a layer there. It might be a super lightweight SSP, and we know it's not going to have all the bells and whistles. So as you conceptualize what this shift is, it's the accordioning and expansion of stacks and the modularization switches, which is probably why everyone's like, curation's not new. It's the same thing. Like, sure, an impression still gets bought and sold, but it's different. And it leaves a lot of room for players to come in and come out. And most importantly, it threatens budgets dramatically. The player we haven't talked about yet is the agency holding company. Why do you think agency holding companies are super important? Because they have the money. Why? How do agencies make money? They make money through margin. And where there is darkness, there is margin. DSPs stole a lot of margin from media planning agencies when media planning went away. And when you just said, like, oh, we're going to go spend some money on TV and then take $20 million in programmatic and give it to the trade desk, and they'll figure it out. Media agency doesn't get to charge for that. That eventually gets ripped out through procurement. You think we're going to see some agency curation desks? You betcha. They already exist, and they're out there packaging deals, and they're selling them to their client to execute in DSPs. And I think you're seeing that people have very lightweight. Yeah, we already talked about lightweight DSPs, and there's a bunch that we don't even know about. And rebates are super important. You were gonna ask a question, Rob?
Yeah. So in that world, does everyone do people wall off certain pieces, or do they try to work with all partners? So in other words, Gareth, to your point, scope three is going the more DSPs, the better. The more of this, the better. The more that they can be involved in it, they get to be judge, jury, and executioner on the impression and do what's right. If I'm an agency curation, curator or something separate, do I try to wall off so that because one of the things I was thinking about in this overall conversation, and feel free to answer that question or take this one, which is I was thinking through the mechanism of, you know, unique demand and who has control over unique demand or campaigns and unique data. And it felt like the one thing that I was just trying to like ascertain through all of this is that if all the data players are playing in all of these pools, right, it kind of comes down to who has the actual control of the campaign. And then there's a matter of is the way for the business model to go is I'm now going to transact in a certain way so that no one can take what I do? Or is this just, again, more of a free for all, just another layer of just more deal IDs, more data flying around, and so forth? Like, how does someone as a curation player in this differentiate and stay alive for the long term? Multiple questions in there. Pick your
I'll jump on the
adventure.
first one. I'll jump on the first one. So, something that's always fascinated me is the inertia that I was talking about earlier. Why are solutions like OpenPath not just the way things are done? Why was there not an explosion of those? And the answer is actually what Scott said. So prior to curation existing, agency holding companies realized that if they had their own versions of ad exchanges, and if they did deals with the ad exchanges, that could be a source of margin for them as deals were running, where they could do principal negotiations, they could get their own deals with supply, and the exchange layer could actually become a profit center for them. So that means that this vertical stack on the far right accidentally deleted an agency hold company profit center. And if you were to ask a DSP, why do you still buy through ad exchanges? Inevitably, someone who is willing to say it will say, well, the agencies just want to. Like, like we can't tell you
That's spelled
why. Yep.
Rebate.
Exactly. We know that another path might perform better, quote unquote. However, that is not necessarily the interest of our client. And that's one of the explanations for why we didn't just have this explosion of vertical stacks going directly to publisher. Is part of the original shield that SSPs had was, well, we're going to go to agency holding companies and kick them back money, and we'll defend ourselves with business terms because we can't technologically.
For your movie reference, I believe the DSPs said, I can't quit you.
Yep.
So let's power on into a little bit more of this. We've got a couple slides left. You want to hit on the pros and cons of horizontal stacks and vertical stacks?
Yeah, I would love to. I actually really enjoy these pros and cons because this is trying to balance like the state of the world today. If I'm like doing an analysis of these companies and really what are they good at, what are they less good at? If you look at the trade desk delivering through OpenPath versus DV360 delivering through a curated stack. The horizontal stacks are seeing success. They're pitching like crazy right now because they're really good at a few things. One is they're wildly flexible. Ask anyone who's ever tried to get a data integration with DV360, like, oh my gosh, there's some vendor, an ancient vendor, I think it's Peer39, who still has components of their integration with DV360 not live. And Peer39 has been around basically as long as I've been in the industry, like 10, 15 years. And
Dinosaur.
Peer39 has been around an equally long, and DV360 is Invite Media, right? It's been around forever and it's still not done. So like these DSPs, they got all the money, man. They're not hot to do bunches of new integrations. It's just not something that they do. And for the curation platforms, they were like, yeah, more the merrier, bring on all the data. Let's do it. Simultaneously, they were really scrappy in incentivization. And when it comes to improving campaign performance, people always talk about data and curation a lot. But I think that the guts of curation, the people who are really making the money in curation, are great ad ops people who are way better compensated by taking 10% in curation than they would be running campaigns elsewhere. And those ad operations people can hop in, start curation businesses. They know how to use data. They've been running deals for years. They know how to drive outcomes. And they say, hey, I'll do a bake-off with your team. Bring it on. I know how to make campaigns work. And they do it and they win. And they can do it in the SSP where they can configure their own fees. And I think that but by virtue of having flexible data integrations, and that's their business, they're data integrators, and the ability for people to actually do campaign optimization and make real money doing it, they are mopping the floor right now with lots of people. They're also faster to test things, right? These guys are nimble. I work with Index all the time. Oh my gosh, in Media.net, like, oh, these guys, they move faster right now than I've ever seen ad tech companies move. Distributed, like the data is not duplicated in bunches of places. It's really nice and clean. It can come right off the page because all these people have access to the page. And moves power dynamic closer to the publisher. I think this is an important one because DSPs and the power dynamic being closer to the publisher is directly related to the fact that DSPs have been buying lists of user IDs for years and just now get just garbage shoved in their face. Like, it is impossible to run a campaign successfully when every exchange is sending you the same bid request 10 times and you're trying to figure out what's differentiated, what's not. Your algorithms are getting gamed. By being close to the publisher, by doing this massive deduplication, which is inherent in buying directly on an SSP, things just work better. Like, because you don't have to sift through all this craziness. Now, there are some cons. Non-transparent fees. You'll hear about this a lot because it's true. The curators, those guys who are the guys and gals who are really good at running campaigns in the middle, they'll take a 30% fee sometimes. They're not scared to do it because they know how good they are at what they do. And as long as they can add 30% of value, they can take a 29% fee and still come out on top. And right now, this is not denoted in sellers.json. It's not made transparent to publishers, even though some people are working on products for this, Scott. I've been chatting around.
Gareth, when
yeah.
I want to add to the transparent part, it's not just fees, and Ali brought this up in our session. It's a black box of targeting.
Mm-hmm.
You may not know what's in your curated deal.
That's their value, right?
That's their
They
value,
know
but
what to put in there.
a lot of curators will tell you what's in it, and they should be able to show it because it was settings that they picked. Now it's like, did you get an organic segment or a non-organic segment? Like, there's some nuance in there, but I'd also posit that the marketers who are hiring the agencies or hiring DSPs, they don't know what the DSP is doing either, and it's sort of a trust game. So I wouldn't say that a curation layer is completely opaque and a DSP is completely transparent. There's lots of DSPs where you just say hit a KPI and let it roll, and you don't know exactly what it's doing. But if it sells shoes, it sells shoes.
I think that's really fair too, because in all of this discussion, this is historically an agency trading desk function. And publishers right now are very up in arms about this, but they were not up in arms about agency trading desks. And agency trading desks were doing this. So publishers are and taking crazy fees. Publishers are up in arms because it's happening in a system that's closer to them, but the function is the same. Like in curation in this sense, right? Everything we're talking about here, these are buy-side pitches. Pitching better performance, pitching like better data implementation. That's something you sell to a buyer, not to a publisher. And the publisher happens to generate more money because it's a net auction, or unfortunately, nominally more money. We have no upside for publishers. I think there is upside for publishers, but because it's all happening in rev shares, it could be, the benefits can go disproportionately to curators, right? And like the example I used earlier, if a curator is driving 30% better performance, they can take a 29% fee and still deliver. And that's, 1%. Great. It's better than not having 1%. Don't get me wrong. But hopefully competition kicks in and those 30% guys get squeezed. Perpetuates the kickback. If agency holding companies are doing this, it's one more place for them to do kickbacks. It's terrible. Like this whole thing just drives me crazy. Like the whole kickback concept, and I'm a believer in performance. And then it's redundant if you're a DSP. DSPs rightfully say we can do all of these things because they technically can. They are technically capable of doing all of these things. However, they've created an environment where, one, they are missing the ability to let you test new ad ops people using a deal ID, which is really like what a lot of curation is. Let me take this ad ops person for a test drive and see if they can beat my ad ops people, and like let's try it out. But past that, like the tech targeting optimization, this is their business. Like this is what they've been selling for the past 15 years. So they look at this and they're like, what? We have been doing precisely this for a long time.
So let's get into the vertical stack cons and maybe hit on like the last three.
I agree. I love vertical stacks. We had to really work to make the cons one in this one because I think that like everything's the nature will trend towards this. I think we're gonna have a bunch of these competing with each other to drive outcomes for people. I think that's where we're going eventually. The last three are fun. I actually talked to a very large DSP about the last three because they're funny. But the first one's a real one. When the DSP is integrated directly with Prebid, you can't really play games with them the same way you could when they were in exchanges. And publishers play games right now. There are refresh games, there are price floor games, there are rotation games, lots of games. And these games do make more money, but they make more money by tricking the DSP into doing something it would not otherwise do. And do they add value? That is an eye of the beholder. The DSP is willing to pay the price. Then they definitely add value for the publisher. The publisher's making more money. But I do think that the games are short-term games. Like I think long-term things need to perform. That's how you make more money. And in the games in the short term, sure, they'll give you a boost, but some games might even hurt you long-term. But yeah, if the vertical stacks are in the pre-bid wrapper, the number of games you can play reduces. Like, don't get me wrong, there are still games to be played there, but it reduces. The other thing is that they eat less garbage. And this is a fun maybe one that I talked about with Scott, where right now, publishers pretty certainly benefit from the bid duplication garbage environment. It's almost certainly a thing. And we saw this when I was running RTK. Like publishers would ask me, what's the optimal number of bidders? And I would show them a line graph that was basically like, well, the more you add, the more money you're going to make. So it's really up to you until your viewability starts getting dinged. And you manage that with a timeout. So like bid jamming works. It just does. If you are getting the more bids you can solicit for a single opportunity, the more opportunities you have to get a higher bid. It's that simple. It's not rocket science. The only thing you have to worry about now is throttling, but we have people who are optimizing that, where it's like, okay, what's the optimal amount of bid jamming before the DSP stops listening? In a vertical world, those words that I just said, throttling and bid jamming, they're not a thing anymore. I have seen how much traffic there is in direct publishers on the internet, and the numbers would actually make DSPs blush, and they would go, wait, what QPS could we listen to every actual ad opportunity on the web for? That's horrifying. Like it is a fraction of a fraction of what they listen to today.
It doesn't mean that they're going to eat less garbage, though. They still love garbage. And that's because they focus on low CPMs and vanity metric KPIs like viewability, completion of pre-roll. like things that are sort of manipulated and show up in a bunch of different ways, they'll chase garbage if it delivers on the KPI. They don't eat organic because they like eating organic. They eat whatever is correlated to an outcome. And if it's garbage, they're going to eat more garbage. So they have the opportunity to eat less garbage because there's less games played, but they have not solved their garbage addiction by a long shot.
And ID bridging, right? Like they like IDs because their
They
clients
love
say,
IDs.
I want to hit these IDs. And they want to say, great, I will. Right? Like that's their incentive. Their incentive is to say, no, I couldn't find them. That's not their incentive. They're not going to say, sorry, I couldn't find your IDs. And then finally, friend or foe. In theory, right? In a non-competitive environment, I think that's a really important part of this. DSPs will bid shade as much as they possibly can. And in a world where there's not all the bid duplication and not all these things, bid shading algorithms could really start to work. And that might be bad. That might put downward pressure on CPMs, right? If everyone's a vertical stack, they're all integrated, they might be able to push CPMs down. And the only defenses against this are price floors, which we'll see what happens in the price floor land. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't hang my hat on price floors. I've never believed in them. And the other one is competition. That's all we can do. That's our defense. We want buyers to bid against each other, and we want buyer A to have valuation of 10 cents and buyer B to have a valuation of 15 cents and buyer C to have 20 cents. And that's how we make sure we get good value. And then we want DSPs and vertical stacks competing. So yes, that's my spiel for publishers is we need to increase competition by increasing information.
Yeah. Now we got 2 slides left. Let's go back to the effects of the shift, and then we're going to talk about recommendations for the publishers and sort of our POV on that. We're getting there.
Yeah, two left is nothing. We'll make our time.
Here we are. So without re-saying everything that we just said in this last hour, what's going to happen? We think that there's going to be a low DSP fee model that emerges. We're already seeing them. This is the transactional DSP. All they really need to do is pacing and invoicing and listen to a single bid request. You don't need all the complexity. There's also going to be pressure on the curation margin because agencies and market competition are going to drive that. If you look at Chris Kane's annual report and talking about the way that margins are set inside curation deals, it's either a fixed CPM, a percentage of CPM, or a fixed price. Those are going to start to compress because people need to start competing. And if agencies run their procurement departments through this, they're going to want to know how much is coming out. That doesn't necessarily move the dollar amount for publishers. It just saves more money for the buyers. And then I think you're going to see reduced SSPs for publishers because SSPs are going to need to start to compete again. And we're going to see consolidation of SSPs. I think you're going to see a bunch of them disappear. If you can't run a healthy curation business on your platform, you're just a dumb pipe. And you're not getting that opportunity. And the incremental revenue that you will make for the average publisher will decrease. So whereas you might have been 1 to 2 or 3% of a stack, you're now going to be a 0.5%. And at that point, we can probably drop you. And so you're going to start to see consolidation inside the SSPs. And I think you're going to see more SSPs lowering their fees to help win. And until performance, aka outcomes, really matters, publishers have less leverage to increase the CPM rates of their inventory because it's still ID based, it's vanity metrics, it's not really outcomes. The closer a publisher can align their media to the outcome, the more important they become in the transaction. And so publishers should be thinking about how do I support outcomes for marketers and making my inventory more valuable. And that might be clean rooms and data and partnerships and exclusive inventory and thinking about how you carve it up and who sells what media for you and how do you know what your performant media is. And that's another reason why curation actually cleans up the ad tech marketplace. Not only is there the vertical stack where there's no games, but a curator can easily say, I don't like your shenanigans, get out of here. And then you're out all that money. And we just talked about it, the supply concentrate, the demand concentrating. And so if you start to annoy one or two SSPs that kick you out of the program, you don't have 300 more SSPs to go to. You have a lot fewer. Now, let's take that back to like the publisher POV, and we decided to come up with some things that we think that should happen in curation. One, I don't think that curation platforms should take an additional fee for sell-side decisioning or from curation houses. They should make their money on additional liquidity, and that aligns you with the publisher. You're already taking a rev share from the pub. Don't take extra from the buy side. Because what that means then is you are making money off of me and I am not sharing in that money. And frankly, I don't know if you're supposed to be doing that. And I don't like it. And if I don't like the way you're doing business, maybe I don't need to do business with you. And then enabling more controls for publishers to manage how their inventory is curated. I think things like a maximum markup would be really interesting. A curator allow list, and not just at the individual curation house, but at the brand level. Google has a lot of tools in there for brand blocks and all sorts of things that were used in the direct business to help publishers control their direct business and defend it from the open auction in certain ways. So you couldn't have direct buyers circumventing you. That never really got built in other SSPs because it didn't exist there and it was all open auction and everyone was like, whatever, I hope you give me some retargeting money. But now it's becoming a problem. So those tools need to develop. And then I think there should be a rev share control where an individual publisher can set the rev share that they want to take from the curation house. When the curation house says, I want to take $1 from every CPM, or I want to take 10% from every CPM of impression that I clear, I think that the publisher should have the right to say, I want to take 0% of that, or maybe I want to take 95 or 100% of it to their own peril. If you're an open auction publisher, you might be super happy of just getting liquid inventory and you say, I don't want to take anything. I want you to use my stuff. Please sell as much as I can. But if you're a highly direct sold publisher with a very specific sales proposition, but you can't quite quit curation yet, you might say, I want to take a 75% of the margin because this is the Super Bowl, this is the front page of the New York Times, like whatever it might be. And I have a sales team in market. And I want you to respect floors. And that's the other thing that's not on here. Floor pricing. When we talk about floors in curation, it's not the UPR floor that's like 25 cents. I want to talk about the rate card floor that my sellers have to respect in market. That $4 deal ID, the $8 video deal. They can't sell for less than that. But these curators are in market selling at $0 floor deals. Because what do they care? They just want the deal to clear and they'll take the margin. I think that they're undervaluing their data, by the way, when they run $0 floor deals. If you target decision-making IT decision makers, a very high value segment, and it clears for 50 cents, the curator takes 5 cents. Does that sound like a proper data fee? No. But the person happened to be on my site and I didn't have anyone else bidding on it, so they got it for 50 cents. That's kind of like that's kind of disrespectful of the value of your own data. So I encourage the curation houses to enforce floors and to push up their own pricing. Not only will they make more money, publishers will make more money. But the catch-22 is that DSPs don't like those. And they won't buy from them. So I understand the challenge there, but I think that publishers need these controls to talk about how their inventory is being bought and sold. And the curation houses out there, You're gonna have to balance the trade-offs of working with various publishers. And I think you got to cut your publishers in on a slice of that pre-auction curation revenue. And I think this is coming, publishers. It's here, it's staying, it's not going away. We just showed you the future of where it is, and in none of the scenarios does this go away. But if you want to take this opportunity to reclaim some of your power, to have a seat at the table, we need to force the conversation and get the tools built that we need. And that's why we're here today. So thank you.
I think we'll be doing a separate discussion about floors. It sounds like Gareth is holding back in his take on that. I don't want to dive into that. I feel like there's others that we would want to add to that conversation. Yeah, and I'm gonna feedback something as a publisher to you guys for your kind of reaction as maybe some last thoughts here, right? So I think in recent years we've heard publishers think of themselves and say, I want to think of myself as a data company, not just media. And if you think about that move, you would not look at what you just laid out as the way that I'm being transacted and go, I'm okay with this. In other words, the value I provide is not just the media, the raw impression to which for you to decorate and give value to. I'm bringing something to this. And so those lines should start to get, again, apply value to what the publisher does, which by the way, and I like the idea that there will be fewer games, and I like that there's that piece of it. I mean, there's almost an aspect we don't even know how performant all of publisher inventory is, but that's partly because we don't know. If we knew and we're part of the game and part of that aspect of it, I could see different strategies for how I go out to market. Again, whether it be direct sold or I go and work with curators and try again, how is my inventory represented? I start to play a little bit different game than just throw everything at the wall and see what happens.
If a DSP can become an SSP and a data vendor can move from the DSP to the SSP, a publisher can become a curation house. And they can be a signal generator for sure, maybe a signal aggregator if they're big enough and want to endeavor that. But it's really worth a look of like, how do we sell across the industry? I mean, when publishers wanted to license their data in like DMP 2.0 land, like the Crux era, and license data directly to the DSPs, it was such a great idea, but it was so hard to do. And we had to do all those things that data licensors did, except we didn't have an enormous product marketing team and a big budget to go do it.
And
But
I'm an
now you
alternative
can
take
put,
here.
I'm going to
So.
let you speak in a second as soon as I'm done, young man. The, the, but now you can do this in curation, and not only can you, and you can do it through audience extension. So not only can you package it in a deal ID where it's super easy and it's even more data safe than the data silos that Crux created, but you can also take a margin when it runs across the rest of the internet or across CTV. So that's a much better model for a publisher than just hoping and praying that it gets bought, that their segment gets bought. Mr. Glaser.
So, a dirty secret about curation is that it was born out of the fact that data doesn't work. And this is a conclusion that any advertiser who has run a performance-focused campaign will tell you, is buying third-party data is something that you do for brands who are convinced they need to hit an audience and are willing to buy garbage. Everyone else, data doesn't work. And the reason, it's a little funny thing about the
You mean
initial
audiences, or what do you mean when you say data?
Yeah.
Audiences?
I mean,
Or
I mean specifically audiences. So specifically, this person is an intender in this, or even a lot of contextual data doesn't drive outcomes the way that we would hope. It needs to be coupled with a lot of other things. It's one signal, but
maybe your context.
I'm always pitching myself. But I think that this is something that a lot of publishers have run into. because a lot of publishers have been told, go be a data company. They do that. They spend a bunch of money. They then have their sellers go out and sell deals. And then the agencies come back and go, hey, these deals aren't performing. Like, what's going on here? And then they go, oh, we don't know. We use this big fancy data platform to do this magical AI number crunching. What do you mean it's not performing? And Curation actually emerged because Audigent, a data company, was selling data successfully. They were getting buyers to use it, and then it wasn't working. And they were like, well, wait, why isn't it working? And then now you're back and forth. Now I was like, oh, well, we need these reports. We need this. We need that. We need X, Y, and Z. And Curation emerged because they were like, wait, we'll just be the ad ops people. We'll make the data secondary. We'll tell you we're buying the data. We'll tell you that that's what's differentiating. But what's actually going on is we're going in there and we're running the campaigns. And we're running a report. We're looking at domains. We're looking at devices. And we're pruning. And we're saying, oh, not converting here, not converting here. Or we're taking this list of sites that we know converts for auto, slapping our data segment on it and saying, oh, you're buying auto intenders, but we just know it's the sites. And we sell that. And that was the birth of Curation, because selling data by
optimization is a
got
key
it.
function in Curation 2.0. And you'll hear Drew Stein, the CEO of Audigent, talk about good curation versus bad curation. He's not arguing that curation is good or bad. He's saying that within curation, there's the good kind, which Gareth just described, and then there's the bad kind, where fly-by-night, we'll just assume that they don't have much of a presence, set up a deal ID and toss it into the wind and don't optimize it. And don't bring good data and bring hygiene to media quality. And that's true. And that's part of the threat, is that anyone can be a curation house and anyone can get access to tools to create deals and sell them to their friend at an agency. Anyone can do that. And curation houses take no risk in the model because they don't own the media and they don't own the pipes. All they need are 3 martinis and a signature. And that's the threat. So really, if you're a really good seller, I encourage you to build a curation house and hire a couple ad ops people.
After all this time, programmatic still comes down to sales.
Right. Ad ops. Good
And
ad ops.
It's all sales. This is all budget.
Right.
Every slide we looked at was, where does the money, who's spending it, and what is this war about? The curation war is about control of the budget.
Gentlemen, thank you for this. I think that this is going to be one of those often referenced sessions to kind of walk through this, to track where we are with this, and providing some transparency into how all these elements and all the players are working. So thank you for, one, taking the time to do it. Two, thank you for being part of Navigator, of the Beeler.Tech community, and speaking so open and honestly about these things. And also, I think just being open to just the conversation. Gentlemen, any last thoughts? Or otherwise, I'll just thank you, and I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob, very much. Appreciate being here.